On March 14th, Donald Trump offered a definitive assessment of the ongoing U.S.-Israeli war against Iran, claiming to the public that Iran's military capability had been 100% destroyed. Yet, exactly one day later, that posture of total victory vanished. Trump publicly appealed to NATO and Asian allies, asking them to send their own ships to the Middle East to help secure the region. When those allies hesitated, the messaging flipped again. Visibly frustrated by the lack of response, Trump declared to the press that the U.S. actually didn't need anyone's help at all. This shows the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean. Iran has effectively shut down this choke point with strikes and naval mines, trapping a fifth of the world's oil supply behind it. Every attempt to project absolute American authority has instead highlighted how alone the U.S. has become on the world stage. The more the administration demands international cooperation, the more the U.S. finds itself in a vacuum. Trump directly warned NATO that ignoring his call for vessels would be bad for the alliance. Yet the military deployment he asked for never materialized. Instead of warships, countries like France, Germany, and the UK offered a joint statement expressing a vague readiness to ensure safe passage. The document notably did not mention the United States by name, committing to no specific action. But here is the country whose refusal should embarrass Trump the most. America's oldest security partners are drafting carefully worded press releases, specifically so they don't have to put their own forces under American command in a war they didn't start. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz made his country's position clear, stating that NATO is strictly a defensive alliance and has absolutely no place getting involved in an offensive operation against Iran. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas reinforced this boundary, publicly stressing that the conflict in the Middle East is simply not Europe's war to fight. This chart shows exactly why these leaders are stepping back. Domestic opposition to joining the American military campaign is overwhelming. 59% in Britain, 63% in France, and 68% in Spain actively oppose involvement. Those voters are reacting to a very specific threat. Iran has explicitly warned European countries that if they send naval assets to the Strait of Hormuz, their military personnel will become legitimate, immediate targets. Facing the prospect of direct casualties and severe domestic backlash, European leaders are choosing political survival over an American alliance. The real reason Gulf states will never fight alongside America in this war, and it has nothing to do with Iran. Nations like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar sit directly on the front lines. They have already absorbed the impact of Iranian drone and missile attacks on their own soil. Yet instead of welcoming American firepower, these Gulf governments actively lobbied Washington to stop the U.S. and Israel from striking Iranian energy infrastructure. They know they weren't consulted before the fighting began. Now they view every American offensive operation not as protection, but as a provocation that paints a target directly on their own vulnerable energy grids. That vulnerability was exposed entirely this week during the strike that neutralized the engine of the Qatari energy sector. For these countries, formally joining the U.S. coalition guarantees retaliatory strikes that would decimate the very industries that keep their economies alive. This is Qatar's Ras Laffan gas facility, an enormous industrial port that recently became the epicenter of Iran's retaliatory strikes. The scale of this single location is staggering. In normal times, 1/5 of the entire world's supply of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, a fuel made by cooling natural gas to a liquid state for transport, flows right through this specific port. In one localized strike, Iranian forces wiped out 17% of Qatar's total LNG production capacity. Current estimates suggest it will take up to 5 years just to complete the repairs. A strike of this magnitude transforms a regional border dispute into a direct disruption of the energy grid that powers global industry. Iran just paralyzed 17% of the Qatari capacity that supplies a fifth of the world's energy, and the Gulf states are still not joining. The economic blast radius extends far beyond fuel. The fighting has severely disrupted the region's massive fertilizer production hubs, which directly endangers global food security and crop yields. This chart shows how those infrastructure attacks are creating severe secondary shocks, like exacerbating a global shortage of helium. Helium is a crucial gas required to cool the equipment that manufactures semiconductors, the tiny electronic circuits used in everything from smartphones to vehicles. All of these supply disruptions hit heavy industrial economies particularly hard. Japan relies heavily on Middle Eastern stability to power its dense energy ports, but its strict pacifist constitution limits military deployments. Despite relying on the region for 95% of its oil, 82% of the Japanese public opposes joining American military action. Japan imports 95% of its oil from the Middle East. Why say no? each attempt by Washington to declare victory is undercut by its inability to recruit international support. The more the U.S. attempts to force its will, the more its traditional allies prioritize de-escalation over partnership. For the nations closest to the blast radius, it comes down to basic geography. The Gulf states have to share a permanent border with Iran. American forces will eventually pack up and leave. Iran will remain a permanent neighbor of the Gulf. Every country in the region knows this. So what exactly is Trump's endgame when nobody will follow him in, and everyone is already planning for the day America leaves?